Tech Talk, time to rock. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone who's watching from all over the world. We got two of your friendly neighborhood philosophers here. We got D Wood, the Dizzle, and we got Mike Jones. How you doing, Mike?
Good. How you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good, pretty good. So, I was actually watching one of your videos. When did you post that? Like yesterday or the day before?
A week ago.
Did
Wait.
you? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I
No, a couple of days ago, actually. Yeah, because I posted on TikTok like a week ago, but then I posted on YouTube like a couple days ago.
Okay. I humbly apologize. I was wrong. But okay, so yesterday's when I saw it. So you were responding to some you're responding to some guy who was basically arguing that the world owes everything. Well, the Western world owes way more to Islam than it does to Christianity. I kind of thought that like that was popular back in the day. Like it was popular way back in the day. Like academics began to like demonize everything Western and then glorify everything
Hmm.
that came from anywhere else. And then that had a so it was that way in academics for a long time. But then after like 9/11 and so on, it just became really popular again to show how tolerant you are by praising and glorifying all things Islamic specifically. You praise and glorify all things Islamic specifically, and you degrade anything that's actually Western, and you heap insults and abuse on it. And so basically Islam was the fount of everything good, and Christianity is just gave rise to everything that's bad, and the West gave rise to everything that's bad. But I actually thought that we're like moving past that at some point. And here, lo and behold, I click on your video, and there's a guy spouting the exact same nonsense, dialed up to 10. And so we're gonna check out this guy's videos. We're gonna check out this guy's videos. Notice how we hear people out. We hear people out. We hear people out. We listen to
Hmm.
what they say, and then we show how insanely stupid it is. But before we jump into some stuff, Mike, why don't you tell everyone? Everyone knows you, I'm sure already, but just in case, why don't you give everyone an idea of who you are, what you do?
Yeah, I'm inspiring philosophy. I do a lot of different types of videos. I do like long form content on YouTube, but I do responses on like TikTok and Instagram. And so this guy I was responding to, it goes by the Geo Hooser. Yeah, he is a very small on YouTube, but he's pretty big on TikTok. He's got over like 250,000 followers, I think. And he
Oh,
put out this video. Yeah, he's big. He's big
no,
on
that makes sense
TikTok.
because I was wondering why you're responding because I used the YouTube videos and I was like, why is IP responding to this guy? But you're pointing out it's. I was just saying that. Matter of fact, I was just saying that last night. I was telling people if they're not sure what direction to go on, Christians are kind of dominating things like Dawa and stuff on YouTube, but there's you and there's not enough people dealing with things on TikTok. There's you and there's a couple others that I know, but
Yeah.
massively understaffed there. So I was telling people if they're not sure what to go into and they want to do social media stuff, that's a good route. But go ahead.
But this guy's not a Muslim. He's a liberal. He does a lot of stuff on geopolitics. And I thought he was smart. So I sort of commented on his video. I'm like, there's a lot of problems because he made a video saying that which basically gave rise to modern science, Islam or Christianity. And he said Islam and Christianity actually held back the growth of science, which is utter nonsense. It's utter BS. It's basically a 19th century myth known
Yeah,
as the conflict
from
thesis.
two guys. Yeah,
Yeah, White and Draper. And they came
yeah.
up with this idea that somehow traditional Christian religiosity was holding back science at every step of the way. And it's pure fiction. And yet people still believe it to this day, even though the consensus of historians that write on the history of science just completely reject the conflict thesis. Well, the
Hmm.
Geo Hooser decided he was going to, well, basically push the conflict thesis. So he said he was willing to learn in YouTube comments. And I said, great, I'll post a reply. I'll show you the problems here. And then he replied and basically just shot himself in the foot. He tried to say these historians I cited were wrong because he found a blog online from non credible experts. He cited someone like Toby E. Huff at one point. I've read Huff's book. Huff agrees with me, yet the Geo Hooser is citing Huff as if Huff agrees with him. So he just pushed utter nonsense. I would say this disclaimer up front. Yes, Islam did contribute to the growth of science. Yes, in the Middle Ages, there were times where the Arab world was ahead of Europe by many centuries. What happened though? This is actually one of the main theses of Toby E. Huff's book, because he notes these two things. The Arabs were far ahead of us, and the Islamic worldview was giving rise to Arabic science. What happened? Because after this, we see the decline of Arabic science. The Islamic science just declines, becomes basically non-existent over a couple hundred years. And then Europe takes off, passes them up, and gives rise to modern science. So historians are trying to figure out, if the Arabs were so far ahead, why didn't Islam give rise to science? Why did Christian Europe give rise to modern science? And there's various reasons for that, which we can get into. But what I will say on the outset is, although Islam did contribute to the growth of science, that in Islam, it also contains limitations and factors that prevented science from becoming something greater, like it did in the Christian West when it became modern science. And there are aspects that Toby E. Huff and Edward Grant talk about that are in Islam that caused it to decline and not become something beyond a religious Islamic understanding of science. It never could become its own institution. It could never become modern science as we know it. So Islam did contribute to science, but also within Islam, there are limitations and problems that led to its decline within the Arab world.
Yeah. You had contributions in Islam in the area of science and philosophy while we're at it. What would happen was Muslims would conquer an area, and then they would all of a sudden gain access to a variety of books, and then the Muslims who were interested in that sort of thing would have to go to the caliph and say, hey, we'd like to look into these things to see if they can benefit Islam. And so you'd have a flourishing for a while of philosophy. So they had philosophers for a while who were still, if you study the history of philosophy, you'll study people like Averroes and Avicenna and so on. So these things would take off for a while. And it's the same thing with science. It's in the realm, usually in the realm of like medicine and engineering and so on. These were the relevant areas because these gave practical benefits to the Muslim community. And various cultures around the world have always had scientific developments in that sense, right? Like someone invents the wheel, someone invents various things that help make life easier. There were always advancements in mathematics. So like in India and China, in Greece, Egypt, the Middle East, so Babylon and so on, everyone's advancing in mathematics. For me, the real difference for the scientific revolution and why it just took off in Europe in a way that it didn't take off anywhere else before. And that's why they call it a revolution. There's a difference between scientific advancements and all of a sudden like this massive revolution. The revolution was one in terms of methodology. They actually clarified various methodologies for how to get closer and closer to the truth. And the other was, you're not just talking about advancements in how to build something or in a weapon or something like that. We're discovering the laws of the universe. We're uncovering the laws of nature. Mm-hmm. And for me, that was, I'm looking at that. Again, anyone can come up with various scientific advancements in, engineering, medicine, things like that. Figuring out the laws of the universe, the laws of nature, these neat little equations and so on. Christians had, I would say, because of their views, had a decisive advantage in that area because they viewed the universe as created by like this cosmic architect, this cosmic mathematician who's ordering everything with these precise laws and so on. So they had that belief, which if you had been, let's say, an atheist or something like that, you wouldn't have had that belief. Think from an atheist, if you were starting from an atheistic perspective and you had no idea what the universe is going to be like, why would you think for a second that there are going to be these neat little mathematical equations behind everything? And like, why would you think that they're even going to be there? You wouldn't, and therefore you probably wouldn't go in search of them. Whereas Christians are kind of convinced beforehand, and they would spend years doing all the mathematical research to try and figure it out. Because in other words, they believed it was there, and then they went out to prove it. They went out to prove that it's there.
Well, here's the distinguishing, because Islam also believes in one God that like gave laws to the universe. So, however, Christianity had some aspects that Islam didn't. For one, Toby E. Huff in his book basically points out that Christians had a very strong concept of conscience, rationality, that humans have a rational uh, ability to discover natural law. The Bible gives guidance, but it's not going to give us literally everything. Whereas in the Islamic world, Toby E. Huff and Edward Grant note is that they didn't have that as strong of an emphasis on the idea of the rational human discovering the laws. Everything had to come from revelation. They had a much stronger emphasis on authority. So the authority of the Quran, this is where you learn. This is the final say. Whereas in Christian Europe, the final say was actually natural law, because God created the natural laws. He created man's rationality so we can discover these types of things apart from revelation. So in Christianity, you had the concept of the two books, the book of scripture and the book of nature. Both we were meant to discover and learn from, and they were meant to help cohere with one another. Nature can help us better understand scripture. Scripture can better help us understand nature. It's not like that in Islam. In Islam, it's scripture. Everything is beneath it. And so they had a strong emphasis on authority, and that man did not have the rational endeavors to truly discover right and wrong. They needed revelation. So they put a much stronger emphasis on that. Because of that, you couldn't develop science in the same way. Another aspect is the idea of original sin. So original sin is this idea in Christianity, but it means man is fallible. Scholars like Noah J. Ephron will note what this led to was the idea, well, if we're fallible, we need to constantly do experimentation, keep fact checking to make sure we're getting accurate results. That's also lacking in Islam. So they had a very strong emphasis on the idea that the oral reciter of traditions was, in some ways, could be infallible, depending on what traditional line you look at. And this, again, Toby E. Huff talks about this. So they put far more strong emphasis on that authority, revelation. So you have basically in Islam, they separated two forms of sciences, the foreign sciences and the religious sciences. The religious sciences were anything that could be used to help Islam. They developed trigonometry so they could calculate where Mecca was to determine how to build a mosque and how to pray. They needed to do astronomy for calculating Ramadan, these kinds of things. But when they figured that stuff out, Huff says that was the end of it. That once it was beneficial to Islam, done. They didn't want it to develop into its own endeavor. So Edward Grant notes in Christian Europe, they had the separation of church and state. They developed their own scientific institutions that could become their own thing and just start discovering the world for the sake of discovering the world. So there were various principles in Christianity that allowed modern science to become what it was. Islam helped with that, but it stagnated it because of principles in Islam. Christian Europe took over knowledge they got from the Greeks, from the Romans, in the Islamic world, and then they just boomed because the principles in Christian Europe allowed for this. So both contributed to science. Christianity went further.
Yeah, the big three factors, as far, because I had a debate with Michael Shermer on the existence of God, but it's funny because I looked up his academic background, and his PhD is in the history of science. And I was like, oh, let me build my entire case on the history of science. So I built my entire case on the history of science. Yeah, sometimes you want to go after an opponent's weak spots. Sometimes you want to go right after his strongest point, just to show, hey, what do you got here? So anyway, the biggest three issues that I have, we've touched on two of them. So one, that Christians believed in this sort of divine architect and so on, this divine mathematician. And I have to say that the Allah of Islam is a bit more capricious. So I don't think they have it to the same extent that Christianity does, but at least they believe in a designer who makes the world and things like that. So they have part of it. But as you're pointing out, there's a different view of what human beings are. And so in Christianity, we're created in the image of God, right? And, people, you can there are multiple interpretations of what that means, because the Bible doesn't say exactly what that means, but it has something to do with our cognitive faculties and our abilities and so on. And so by the time you get to a flourishing Christianity, by the time you get to the period where science is about to take off, they view themselves as, it's like we're created for this kind of thing. We're created to figure things out. We're created to somehow connect with God's ideas and so on. And so it was, one, the universe it's what philosophers call intelligible. It's intelligible. It's capable of being understood. But two, we're the kinds of things that can understand it. So there are other things that can't understand the laws of nature. We're created to be the kinds of things that can understand this. And since the laws are out there, we're the kinds of things that are created to go out and be able to do it. Then why wouldn't we want to do that? And so that's two of the three. The third one is that they viewed it as like good. There's something good, like really, really good. They regard it as a form of worship, that if you go out and you figure out something about how God is regulating the universe, how God is running the universe, you've just made a contact with the mind of God. And so, I mean, it's almost like being in worship, singing a worship song for them. You're actually like making a connection with the divine and so on. So they had these ideas. Islam is lacking two of those. I mean, I can think of two passages in the Muslim sources where...
If you want to, I shared my screen. If you want to put this book on, I can show you right in the passage what I was talking about. It's kind of like what you're going on about too.
Let's see. There we go.
This is Toby E. Huff's book. Yeah. So you can see here he says Christian philosophy and theology in the 12th and 13th centuries unequivocally declared man to be the possessor of reason. In this capacity, enabled him to decipher the most mysterious puzzles of God's creation. It also enabled man to decipher the mysteries of the divine word itself, unaided by revelation, without the need for prevarication. This outlook stands in contrast to Islamic thinking of the time. Whether one speaks of the philosophers or the theologians, for among the latter, it is clear that the Ash'ari, I don't know how to say that, Ash'arite view of man and nature.
Oh, Ash'arite. Okay.
Ash'arite view, based on Islamic atavism, known as occasionalism, was very much opposed to the well-ordered, even mechanistic and physically determined concept of the natural order that evolved in the writings of the Christian theologians of the 12th and 13th centuries. So he goes on to say, to be sure, the Arab philosophers did develop Platonist philosophical views that were offensive to the religious elite of Islam, but they did not elaborate the rationalistic or mechanistic worldview that the European Platonists of the 12th century built on Plato's edifice. Even more in the contrast, the dialectical theologians of Islam could not embrace the naturalistic image of nature composed by causal forces of nature, and above all, would not tolerate the idea that events described in the Quran could be explained by naturalistic accounts. So as you can see, they had this aversion to interpreting the Quran through the use of natural sciences very early on. They had a much stronger emphasis on revelation. If it didn't come from Allah, we got to be very skeptical of these kinds of things. Whereas this was the exact opposite in Christian Europe. So he goes on to say, like, conversely, such a tradition never developed in Islamic thought in its absence in contemporary sources of objections to fictionalizing the people and events of the history of Islam. So basically, Islam was just it gave rise to interesting mathematical and scientific ideas when it benefited Islam. When it didn't benefit Islam, or they saw no way it could benefit Islam, it was kicked to the curb. And Huff goes on to note in his book, there were book burnings in the Islamic world where they were burning the natural scientific books. Anything they were getting from the Greeks, sometimes they'd be like, you know what, this is contradictory to Islam, or it's not helping Islam, let's get rid of it. It's not so much just that the Mongols came in and burned everything. Sometimes they were burning their own books.
And so as far as I could put together, what you have, it's like the mother of all scientific hypotheses that you ended up with in Christian Europe, in that once you put together the ideas that the universe can be understood, two, we're the kinds of things that can understand it, and three, it's good that we do so, then keep in mind, you don't know what the law of gravity is. You don't know what these little laws are yet. You have to believe that they're out there before you actually spend years doing the research to try and figure one of these out. But it's like one massive scientific hypothesis in the sense that if we're right about what we believe about the universe and about us, then we're going to be able to go out and figure this out. And it's going to be good when we do it. Mm-hmm. And it's just interesting because if you were starting from an atheistic framework, why would you think that the universe has these neat little equations too? Why would you think that you're the sort of thing that's capable of figuring these things out? Your cognitive faculties haven't been selected for that sort of thing. They've been selected to help you find food and a mate and so on? Why are you going to think you're going to be able to get to these equations at the bottom of the universe? And three, why would you care if it's not something that's specifically helping you? Then if it's just knowledge for the sake of knowledge, why would that be a good thing as it was among Christians? So again, Islam lacked two of those. Atheism, I would say, lacks all three. Christians had all three, and it's kind of put forward as a big scientific hypothesis where the universe can be understood. We're the kinds of things that can understand it. If we're right about what we believe about the universe and ourselves, we're going to be able to understand this. And so I actually regard every scientific hypothesis ever from that time on as confirmation of that original scientific hypothesis. Every time a scientist in his lab is doing something and confirming or disconfirming a hypothesis, he's confirming that original scientific, the mother of all scientific hypotheses, that we're the sorts of things that can go out and figure these things out. Now, quick objection here from Wu Li. Inspiring philosophy, then how science flourished under commies. Now, when did science flourish under commies? Was that before Christians came up with the entire methodology and showed how it worked, or did they come up with it independently or something like that?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. And if you read Tom Holland's book Dominion, he notes that like basically communism borrowed extensively from the Christian worldview and just perverted things. So I mean, like, this is one of the main theses of his books, that Christian thought has saturated the whole world. You can't get away from it. So even ideas that are like communism, which are vehemently opposed to Christianity, are still borrowing from the Christian worldview in ways. And then they try to build on it. And then, of course, these ideas collapse. I think this is the case we're going to see with current trends of secular humanism over the next 100 years. But it also happened with communism. They borrowed from Christians in a lot of ways. And Holland has a whole section in his book on this, I believe, in one of the chapters towards the end.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, Wu Li, everyone can benefit from some sort of discovery. Whatever the source, whoever invents paper, whoever invents certain things in the world, the entire world, whoever invented the wheel, guess what? All of humanity was eventually affected by that and so on. And so, yeah, you don't need to say, well, other people have science too. We know that. We've already acknowledged there were scientific developments before the scientific revolution. But as far as the methods of science and the scientific revolution, just you can't deny where that comes from. We know where that comes from. All right, let's take a couple quick super chats, and then we'll jump into the video of a super genius who's about to destroy everything we believe. It's going to be powerful. How would you guys say we should bring our scientific academia back? How do we get people to understand that God's word is truth and that science does or ought to revolve around God's word and world?
Well, it depends on what you mean by the question here. Do you mean like, I mean, those are principles. We don't say that like, I don't know exactly what you mean here. Are you trying to say that like everything has to be subject to the Bible? Because the Christian Europes were, again, of the idea that there are two books, the book of Scripture and the book of nature, and both need to work and cohere together, these kinds of things. So God has sort of like written his word in nature itself, and we can discover it that way as well. So if you're asking, like, how do we get people to realize that Christianity and science are not in conflict? Study the history for sure. That's kind of what we're doing here today to talk about that. And right now there's a lot of anti-Christian bias in academia. I did a video called Are Christian Scholars Biased? And I showed, basically, studies have shown there is anti-Christian bias in academia. So right now in academia, there is prejudice against being a Christian or thinking you can be a scientist and a Christian. This is what Jerry Coyne, for example, explicitly says, and he's completely ignorant on the philosophy and the history of this. But I think the best way to combat this is just by talking about the history, convincing Christians that science isn't the enemy, because they've been told all their lives it is by scientists and by, fundamentalists. So we need to combat it just wherever we see it and just start working towards the idea that Christianity is as crucial for the development of science. So if we move further away from a Christian worldview, we're not going to, I honestly think we won't see the same level of commitment to natural law, systematic ordered universe, that the world that we can discover is rational. And we see this in coming out of things like postmodernism or people with like in the woke crowd saying that 2 + 2 can equal 5, for example, or, you know, like the whole gender issue. I mean, it's clear denial of science in a lot of ways. So I'd say we need to stick to basically Christian principles all around. Okay, get rid of the Christian fundamentalism, which is also hurting science, and the extreme anti-theism, which is in woke nonsense that is also hurting science. So we need to find a good middle, and that would be, I'd say, a rational, intellectual Christian approach.
Yeah, it's interesting in that, you know, after the scientific revolution, I mean, people thought of like Christianity and, you know, and science as really good buddies until White and Draper came along. They we need to do shows specifically on them and how they just like massacred the history of science. But they're writing to people who hadn't read these sources and so on. They're like just I mean, horrible, like the worst of the worst quote mining, to where you'll quote someone and make it say the exact opposite of what the person was actually saying. But the people your audience, they're not familiar with what Augustine said over here, so they rolled with that. But it actually became so influential that Christians bought into it. Like, oh, we do have this great conflict. Yeah, so guys, I'd say maybe get back to the ideas that gave rise to the scientific revolution, that, hey, this universe was made by God. And two, we are created in the image of God. We are the kinds of things that are made for this sort of thing. And it's good that we understand it. You're learning about how God runs the universe, and that's cool to do. So yeah, I would say get back to that mindset. It's cooler.
There's a recent book came out a few years ago called Of Popes and Unicorns by David Ungariano and David Hutchins. And it's basically just showing how Draper and White were really wrong. And it's written for like a layman audience. So recommend that book.
Yeah. Any of you know how I can evangelize when I deal with social anxiety? I stutter often in confrontations and debates, and my mind struggles to keep up. Yeah, just focus on, you can actually like try to deal with that, or you can work around that, do social media. Make videos, things like that. Then you don't have the anxiety of being in that situation.
Practice makes perfect. Start by talking with people online. When you're behind a screen, it will help you to think of things to say. Then you can maybe go into like a TikTok live, Instagram live, talk to people there. And that's another way. So just start working your way towards it. Practice makes perfect.
Matt Silva says, hello, guys. I got a question to D. Wood, the great Islamophobe. D. Wood, where's Gay P? Police be upon him. He's probably twirling that red boa he has. IP, you rebut many... Good question here. IP, you rebut many TikTokers. Why not Mike Winger? Ooh, hypocrite.
Because he's not worth my time.
There we go.
I got more important things to do.
There we go. Not even worth the time. Not even worth the time. Thank you for inspiring me to refute Islam on TikTok. Shameless plug. Hey, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. At Worthy is the Lamb 777. You saw it here, folks. Jot that down. At Worthy is the Lamb 777. I hope you're posting good stuff and that I didn't just embarrass myself by sharing that channel. But everyone go check that out. And yeah, if you go check it out, let me know in the comments what you think later on. Because I was just saying we need more people on TikTok, so that is absolutely true. All right, we got some more Super Chats, but I want to jump into this video. Right before we get started, I did want to where did I put those? Oh, here we go. I wanted to, along the lines of what you were saying, I wanted to give the Islamic attitude towards science. This one comes from one of Muhammad's companions. See this? This is in Sahih al-Bukhari. It's one of the chapter headings. So notice the chapter heading about the stars. This is Muhammad's companion, Abu Qatada. Abu Qatada mentioning Allah's statement, and indeed we have adorned the nearest heaven with lamps. Surah 67:5. So according to the Quran, stars, those are the lamps there. Stars are missiles that Allah uses to shoot demons, when they try to sneak into paradise, right? And there are other uses, according to Islam. There are to guide travelers and just for beauty. And that's, that's okay. But check out what Abu Qatada says. So he mentions, and indeed we have adorned the nearest heaven with lamps, 67:5. And he said, the creation of these stars is for three purposes. And they are, 1, as decoration of the nearest heaven. 2, as missiles to hit the devils. And 3, as signs to guide travelers. So, and here you go. Here's the attitude towards science. So, if anybody tries to find a different interpretation, he is mistaken and just wastes his efforts and troubles himself with what is beyond his limited knowledge. So this is exactly what we were saying. This is exactly what IP was saying. Allah has told you why he made stars. That's in the Quran. If you try to figure out some other explanation for what stars are, if you try to figure out anything else about stars, you're wasting your time. It's a waste of time. You can't do it. Why? You're not the sort of thing that's going to be able to figure this out. You only know anything because Allah is revealing it to you through his books. That's the only way you're ever going to know anything. So give it up. Don't even go out and try. And so that's early on. That's one of Muhammad's companions. Just quote one more to give you an example from later Islamic scholars. So this is Tafsir Jalalain, so one of the most popular commentaries of all time. These are the two Jalals. This is the commentary on 8820, where Allah spreads out the earth flat. And so the commentary on 8820. And the earth, how it was laid out flat, that's the Quran quotation. Have you not considered how the earth, how it was laid out flat? And thus infer from this the power of God, exalted be he, and his oneness, the commencing with blah, blah, blah. There's a part about camels, blah, 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 blah. And here we go in the middle. As for his words, sutihat, laid out flat, this on a literal reading suggests that the earth is flat, which is the opinion of most of the scholars of the revealed law, and not a sphere, as astronomers have it, even if this latter does not contradict any pillars of the law. So look at what's going on here. It's the experts in the Quran know that the earth is flat because of the Quran. The astronomers think it's a sphere, and so they just don't know what they're talking about. Although he does clarify, this doesn't contradict any pillars of the law. So it's not like you're committing adultery or something like that by believing that the earth is a sphere. But I mean, just notice what's going on here. It's the conflict. The conflict is between the experts on the Quran and the scientists, the astronomers. So you do have this idea built into Islam from the very beginning, and it carried its way through to the great Quran commentators.
Yeah, right. And the interesting thing about that is, like, yeah, that's what Toby E. Huff is talking about in his book, The Rise of Early Modern Science, is that you have these authority figures, the Quran, the commentators on it, the tafsirs, the hadiths. That is above all. You can't contradict it. You can't reinterpret it. Once the later commentators have given you the correct interpretation, shut up. That's dogmatic now. And Muslims will try to use this as like evidence for like the superiority of Islam, because they'll say, look at how much more answers we have. And you guys have confusing things like the Trinity and Eucharist. But Edward Grant, in his book, The Foundations of Modern Science, actually points out in the last chapter that when Christians were encountered by things like Trinitarian theology, hypostatic union, the Eucharist, they didn't know how to fully explain these things. They were mysterious. So they came up with new language they got from Greek philosophy. They came up with new terms to try to explain this. Grant then notes that language filtered into the study of natural philosophy, which later became science, and helped it grow. So just having a little bit of mystery causes humans to think, I got to find a way to explain this. And that gave Christians of Europe new language, which filtered into the sciences that helped it to flourish and grow. So when you have a system where you have authority and they need to explain everything for you, it prevents growth. It prevents people from trying to go out and explain things and figure things out based on your own reason and capacity, which we saw with Islam. Whereas in Christianity, God sort of gives us a system and says, all right, here's the theology, but you need to discover natural law. You need to figure out how these are going to work within, your entire worldview. I want you to be a reasonable capacity with your own capacity for reason, basically. Figure these things out. I'm helping you, but you have to come along and become a reasonable agent, or figure this kind of stuff out. And that helps theology, philosophy, and science grow.
It's interesting. Like there's the method in the Middle Ages for studying theology and so on. Very interesting. They'd start off with a problem, and then you come up with your solution to the problem. So your hypothesis about what it is that deals with this. And then you show how this accounts for this amount of data in the Bible, in the scripture. And then other people would point out, but it doesn't account for this, and you're going against this. And so you either have to drop your hypothesis or you modify your hypothesis so that it takes into account more of the data. And so they worked on this for years, and so this works its way through the university system. So the university system in Europe, these are originally, I mean, these are Christian places that were originally for studying theology and so on, but then they give rise to the sciences as well. And then they just use the same method, but they use it with the universe. So the same method they're using with theology. Here's my hypothesis for solving this issue and so on. And then, okay, how well does it account for the data? Oh, it doesn't account for this data. Okay, let me modify it so that it accounts for the data better. And you just end up applying that to the universe. And so you're talking about the two books. They had the method from the one book, and they say, hey, let's apply this method to the other book. And yep, interesting stuff. All right, folks, let's go ahead and jump into the most powerful video you'll wish you'd never seen.
Which religion advanced Western civilization more, Christianity or Islam? The answer is Islam, and it's not even a question. You might be thinking that Europe made all of these advancements and they were Christian nations. And it's true, Europe was Christian and they made all of these scientific advancements, but they did that in spite of the church. Galileo, Dante, Marco Polo, Giordano Bruno were all great thinkers, scientists, and mathematicians who were imprisoned or executed by the church because their teachings went against dogma.
So you can pause it there.
That was so massively misleading. I was thinking about the Bruno example, but that was so massively deceptive. I would not. So we're under 30 seconds into this video. I would already not trust this guy at all, just based on what he did there.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
This is total nonsense. For one, Marco Polo and Dante were not really considered natural philosophers. I don't know where he's getting this. And they weren't in prison for having things that went against the church. Dante was like praised for his like Divine Comedy and whatnot. He was not someone who the church hated. Like, I don't know what he's talking about, where he's getting his information. He'll bring up Bruno. Okay, first of all, the Christians, the church never persecuted anyone for doing science. That is a myth. That never happened. Bruno was executed for theological views. He joined a specific Catholic order, which said you have to believe X, Y, and Z. He didn't believe X, Y, and Z, so they executed him. Now, I don't agree he should have been executed. That was wrong. Could have been excommunicated, kicked out. So they went too far there, obviously. But he wasn't persecuted for practicing science. He wasn't really even a scientist. Some historians basically describe him as like a mystic. He was kind of like the Deepak Chopra of his day in many ways. He scolded Copernicus for relying too much on measurement and not on intuition. So this was not like some great scientist discovering things. He was having his own metaphysical ideas. He brought up Galileo. One second.
I just wanted to comment on Bruno, because this is what I'm just saying is massively deceptive. Bruno was a Dominican friar and became a pantheist, rejected the Trinity, rejected the deity of Christ, the incarnation, all this stuff, and was executed. So you and I be on the same page. Shouldn't have been executed. Why? Well, the harshest punishment that the church could give, according to the New Testament, was excommunication. Okay, if you don't want to follow this, the door is over there. So that's what should have been done. So we can say, hey, they shouldn't have executed this guy. But it's important to understand why he was executed. He was executed for being a heretic, not for science. This guy just made it sound like he was punished for science. But just keep in mind, since this guy's praising Islam, saying Islam doesn't have these issues, if you're talking about people being executed for heresy, dude, I'll ask you now in advance before we even go into Geo Husar. Do you want to go down that road? So if I pulled up examples of people being executed under Islam for heresy, not for science, for heresy, for heretical views, then you'd say Islam got the same problem, right? Because you just made it sound like these guys were punished for science, and that Islam's not punishing people for science, when actually this guy's executed for heresy. And I can give you endless examples of that happening in Islam. So what's going on here? I'd be interested in finding out. All right, back to Galileo. You were about to go into Galileo.
Yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions about him. He wasn't persecuted for doing science. He published a book where he basically taught his Copernican model as basically a fact. In the day, it would be called a theory. They defined theory a little differently than we did. And that was a problem because people don't realize that at the time, the science was on the church's side. Copernicus said the planets went around the sun in perfect circles. There's no physics today that could describe how that is possible. When we developed models from the work of Newton and Kepler, elliptical models, the church accepted it with ease because it's like, oh, that's how the physics works. In Galileo's day, The physics was on the church's side because they looked at the Copernican model and said, this is crap. Planets can't just move around an object in perfect circles. So the science was actually against Galileo on that day, not on his side.
One quick pause too, because everyone's so familiar with the idea now that we're going around the sun that they don't realize how insane that sounds until you've done the research and you can figure out things like how inertia and momentum and all these things work. And when you don't understand the laws, it sounds insane, right? It sounds insane. So one, that, close to the equator, we're spinning at about 1,000 miles an hour. I mean, think about this. We're spinning. Someone comes along and you have no idea what's going on. And someone says, hey, do you know you're spinning at 1,000 miles an hour right now? What? What are you talking about? Are you insane? Oh yeah. And you're flying through space right now. If you don't understand how that can work and you can still feel like you're still right now, that sounds insane. That would be along the lines, ladies and gentlemen, if I came up to you and I said, hey, I got my new scientific theory. Did you know that the room that you're in is spinning at 1,000 miles an hour like a top right now? Yeah, it's just spinning like crazy. It's, you're going in crazy. You'd be like, what are you talking about? Are you an idiot? That's what these claims sounded like to lots of people. That's why there was just a lot of built-in resistance from everyone. It's like you just came out with something that sounds absolutely insane. We're spinning. We're moving at 1,000 miles an hour right now. I don't feel myself moving. What in the name of common sense are you talking about? What that means is you have to come up with an explanation for how this is going on. And that's what happened during the scientific revolution. They figured it out. They figured out how to explain it. Took some time, though.
The only thing Copernicus got right was that the sun is the center of the solar system. His physics and how he described how the Earth and the planets would move around the sun was absolute crap. So the scientists or the natural philosophers of the day looked at this and went, no, this isn't going to work. You got to actually fix your physics here. And then again, as soon as Kepler and Newton came up with elliptical models, the church was like, all right, yeah, that works. That fits the astronomy. It fits the math. We're in.
And people don't understand kind of the behind the scenes drama with Galileo. Galileo had the backing of the Jesuits. He had an entire order that had his back. Yeah. These guys are in conflict with the Dominicans at the time. And you have these guys sort of vying for authority and so on. And at the same time, the Catholic Church is dealing with the Protestant Reformation in other places and what's going on. And all of a sudden you got Galileo saying, hey, you Bible guys, don't be coming in here and trying to straighten me out. And so he's sounding a bit like a Protestant, even though he's a Catholic. He's sounding a little bit like, hey, I don't need you guys to be telling me what to think about. I don't need you priests telling me what to think about Scripture if it's something I can go out and study for myself. So you have that in the sense that his enemies, again, he has his buddies, but his enemies are going around saying, look what this guy's doing, man. Look what this guy's doing. So anyway, he earlier in his career, he signs a document saying, okay, I won't teach this stuff as fact and so on. He eventually goes to the Pope when one of his buddies, one of his longtime supporters becomes Pope. He goes in there, fails to mention that he had signed a document saying he wouldn't teach his stuff. Says, hey, do you mind if I put out my book on this? The Pope says, yeah, go for it. The Pope says, just include this one little idea here that you could be wrong about this. There could be an even better hypothesis that we haven't considered yet that could account for these things. Just include that there, that God might always have some explanation that we haven't even thought of. Include that, which Galileo did, but it's a dialogue. He puts it in the mouth of Simplicio, who's the idiot in the dialogue. So he puts the Pope, who supported him, he put his idea that he requested, hey, you want to put this, just put it out there that we may not have the full. By the way, the Pope was right. The Pope is right. There was more to the picture. There was more to the hypothesis that Galileo wasn't aware of. But the Pope says, hey, just put this little thing in there saying, hey, there may be more to the explanation than we're aware of, which he was right about. But he puts it in the mouth of the idiot. This gets back to the Pope. And then it comes out that he had signed a document saying he wouldn't teach this stuff as fact. And then the Pope said, I've been deceived. The Inquisition was all they were going to require after the investigation, they were going to require Galileo to say, I inadvertently forgot that I'd agreed not to do this. And so, oopsie, and that would have been it. That was the punishment. By this time, the Pope was really ticked off. And he's like, whoa, this guy just duped me to my face and called me an idiot. Yeah. And so, all right, no more Mr. Nice Guy. And they sentenced him to house arrest at his beautiful, beautiful house. So that was...
And yeah. It was a political. It was political. That's what Galileo was cocky. He made political attacks against the Pope. And then they responded by basically having him recant, saying, hey, this Copernican model, which goes against everything we know about physics, is just an hypothesis. It's not a theory yet, aka fact. And then when he did, he still talked about it after this when he was under house arrest. He didn't just abandon it. He just didn't ever go around with the cocky attitude saying it's a fact. Galileo was not perfect. He contributed greatly to the development of science, but there's a lot more complexity going on in the Galileo affair people just don't know about.
Yeah, and it's just amazing that the champions of reason, they distill everything down to, Galileo, he tried to do science and the church just crushed him. And that is the standard. That is the only relationship between Christianity and science. It's right there. You saw it. That one incident, that's the entire thing. So endless conflict and hostility. And it's just amazing that the people who use that theory consider themselves champions of reason when you're I don't know, you're a clueless idiot if that's what you think, if you don't realize what's actually going on. I mean, just imagine a Christian gets fired from some university or something like this, and there are a bunch of reasons. He's cheating on his research, and he's plagiarizing sources. There's all these things behind the scenes. He tells off the president of the university, spreads lies about him and stuff. He eventually gets fired, and they say, "Oh, you see, this is what academia does to Christians. I'm being persecuted."
Right.
No atheist would fall for that. You'd say, come on, there are all these other things going on. But you get to Galileo, and suddenly all that common sense goes out the window, and it's just, nope, that's the model. This is the model between science and religion. Yep. Wild stuff. And so, but to their credit, the new atheists do think that this is like religion in general, and science, versus science. But this guy's like, nope, that's just Christianity. It's Islam is great. So let's get back to this walking clown emoji.
Nicholas Copernicus did not allow his work to be published until after he passed away, which means that the evolution of science, mathematics, and just human thought evolved despite the church.
Okay,
not because of it.
Okay.
What, did you just hear what he said? He said Copernicus had his work published after his death. This proves that all scientific advancement happened in spite. That's a pretty big jump from one little piece of something got published posthumously.
Yeah. And so the funny thing is this guy replied to me because I and I'm going to post another response to him tomorrow on TikTok and Instagram and Twitter. Yeah. It's crap. So, but he brought up a quote from Copernicus claiming that he thought he was going to die like the Pythagoreans did. I tried to find that quote. Utter nonsense. Copernicus never said that. Copernicus didn't publish his stuff on his deathbed, not because he was scared of the church. He was scared other scientists of the day were going to make fun of him.
He thought he thought everyone was going to call him an idiot, which is exactly what would have happened.
Here's a quote from Owen Gingrich, who's a professor emeritus of astronomy at Harvard University. He says if he was alive during the days of Copernicus, here's what he would have said. You would no doubt have told him to get lost and to take all that nonsense with him. Think how much harder it would have been to walk west than walk east. Totally ridiculous. He's talking about Copernicus's ideas in his day. It would have been totally ridiculous to the scientists of the day. That's why when Copernicus published it, he published it as a mathematical hypothesis, not as a way the universe actually works, because he realized the problems with everything that was going on with physics in his own work.
Yeah. So what ends up happening is this gets put forward as a hypothesis. This just helps you with your calculations. Here's a little model that can help you with calculations of where things are going to be in certain times and so on, but not necessarily an accurate representation of the way the world is. But think about this. He doesn't want to get called an idiot by fellow scientists. You see what science does? Science suppresses science. He had a scientific view, but he was worried about scientists making fun of him. You see, it's fear of science. This shows that science only develops in spite of science. What a dope, man. All right, back to this clown.
emerging supreme, even though all the aristocracy of Europe tried to stop it. Now let's go back to
all
the Middle
the
Ages,
aristocracy,
between 500 to let's say 1300, when all of Europe was united by the same kind of Christianity. The countries were still warring brutally with one another. Most of the population was illiterate, and any teachings and breakthrough that remotely contradicted what the clergy was saying was shut down. In Christian Europe, the Bible was written.
False. They never did that. In fact, John Hellebrand notes the Catholic Church was one of the largest funders of astronomy, probably the history of mankind. They were not shutting down innovation. Mm-hmm. They were allowing the study of Aristotle. Like at one point, like the Paris in like 1277 outlawed Aristotle, which didn't actually work. People still studied Aristotle, but not because they were worried like Aristotle went against dogma. They were worried it limited what people could say was possible. They were worried about limitations Aristotle put on natural philosophy, aka scientific research. So no, they weren't shutting down dogma. In fact, Galileo's main opponents said flat out in a letter in 1615 that if they were wrong and Galileo was right, it just meant they didn't interpret scripture properly. So they need to go back and figure out that maybe nature, and again, 2 books, nature is going to help us interpret scripture. They didn't dogmatically shut down this stuff. That's just, again, another myth of the conflict thesis.
Yeah, and even with Galileo, there were times when they would say, okay, if you're claiming you're right about this and other people are wrong, come in here, bring your evidence. We'll sit here. We'll sit here and listen. Oh, you can't? And he could. There were times he could. Later developments would allow him to do it, but it was at the time he couldn't prove this. It's like, wait, you have no evidence for this. You have no evidence for what you're saying right now. So anyway, the point is, it's not. He's saying something different. Kill him. And I mean, think if this guy had such awesome what examples did he give? Bruno, nothing to do with science. His view is nothing to do with science. Galileo. He was doing science, but the reason he ticked off people, including the Pope, weren't because of the science. That was ultimately, they used that as a justification for coming after him, but it was other issues. And so it's like, wait a minute, if there's this clear hostility between Christianity and science, you should be able to give examples that aren't deceptive. And he hasn't given any yet. He's just said some stuff
in Latin, which only a small percentage of the population was able to understand. So if you were a regular farmer, you would just have to trust the priest to say, yes, what I'm reading to you is actually in the Bible. While in the caliphates, the Quran was written in Arabic, and if you could read Arabic, you could read the Word of God.
If you could read Arabic, how many people was that? How many people? Even the prophet supposedly couldn't read Arabic.
And the exact opposite was going on in the Muslim caliphates. While the Christianization of Europe just led to more war and barbarity, unity was actually taking place in the Middle East. And
that's just false.
Hold up. I want him to repeat that. So while Europe is just endlessly fighting and slaughtering each other and so on, in the Muslim world, it's unity and harmony. Hold on, hang on. Fortunately, I have a friend who literally wrote the book on the history. Let's just hear this guy out one more time and make sure that's what he said.
You could read the Word of God. And the exact opposite was going on in the Muslim caliphates. While the Christianization of Europe just led to more war and barbarity, unity was actually taking place in the Middle East and Northern Africa. The ancient cultures of Persia and Egypt merged with the center at Baghdad. The largest city in Christian Europe, if you do want to include the Byzantine Empire, was Constantinople, which had a population of about 400,000 people. Baghdad had a population between 700,000 to 1 million. Baghdad was the largest and most prosperous cultured city in the world for centuries under the Abbasid Caliphate. 3 cities during the Middle Ages with the best universities in the world were in Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba. Those universities existed 2 centuries before the first one in Europe, which was either Oxford or the one at Bologna.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
literally every sentence this guy says has a problem with it.
For one, the Muslim world did not have independent universities. They had religious schools, and everything had to be subject to the Islamic teachings and rules. They weren't the what are they called? The madrasas. They weren't teaching natural philosophies. They weren't teaching the sciences, only if it helped Islam in some certain way. So these were not independent universities, which was a purely Christian European invention. Independent universities with their own governing board. They could do what they wanted. They weren't beholden to like a sponsored state or something. They could operate fully functionally independent. That was an invention of Europe. So Christian Europe. So you had proto universities throughout the Islamic world, no doubt. Like the madrasas did teach a lot of religious stuff. They did teach some aspects of science if it benefited Islam. But again, Toby E. Huff just notes that they were not universities in the sense of the European, what the Europeans developed. It just is not there.
This guy's making it sound like they had the best schools of all time, and they're doing all this great stuff and all this great science, and then Europeans came along and figured things out later.
Yeah, I mean, they did. I mean, I'm not going to deny the Arabs did not figure. The Islamic world did figure out a lot of things, and then the Europeans took it and built on that. But Islam, it all had to be subject to the authority of Islam. They couldn't allow science to develop into its own institution apart from Islam. And when they tried that, the people that did that were, basically persecuted as heretics. There were book burnings that Toby E. Huff documents in his book, The Rise of Early Modern Science. So they didn't let it ever become its own thing. So they made advances, and then Islam, when they figured out the authorities, they figured out the decisions on everything, the legal precedents, there was no more room for growth. So this is why we see a decline of science in the Arab world, starting like the 1300s, 1400s, 1500s, and Europe just shoots up because Christianity did not have those limitations on science.
I just messaged Robert Spencer to see if he's would like to comment on the unity. This is so weird. It's like I mentioned that this was like I thought this was dying out. I thought hang on, here we go. Hang on. Let me get Robert in here.
All right, get him in here.
Let's see. Hang on, it's not letting me select my views. I do not understand this new setup here, man.
It's amateur hour. Every time I'm streaming with David Wood,
hang on. Let me go back to okay. I can do it over here. I can't do it while. Okay. Hey, Robert.
Hey, gentlemen. Good evening.
Hey, how you doing?
Never better. But I tell you, I've been watching all this time, and this guy's driving me crazy.
Is he?
Yeah. Can I give you a few little bits of information? Not only, David, did I write The History of Jihad, which I happen to have right here. There it is. The History of Jihad from Muhammad to ISIS. But 17 years ago, when you guys were in third grade, I wrote Religion of Peace, Why Christianity Is and Islam Isn't, which is a book you can still find out there. And I wanted to quote from Maimonides, the great 12th century Jewish philosopher who had quite a lot to do with the Islamic scientists of his day. And, you were talking about this, that the Muslim scientists did not have an idea that was cognate to the Christian idea that the universe was created according to consistent and observable laws. And this is the basis of all science. Without it, you can't do anything. And so Maimonides says this is what the Islamic philosophers thought. And I quote, "Human intellect does not perceive any reason why a body should be in a certain place instead of being in another. In the same manner, they say that reason admits the possibility that an existing being should be larger or smaller than it really is, or that it should be different in form and position from what it really is. That is, a man might have the height of a mountain, might have several heads, and fly in the air, or an elephant might be as small as an insect, or an insect as huge as an elephant. And this method of admitting possibilities is applied to the whole universe, because they're bound to do that because they understand Allah as absolute will. It's very simple that, in the Quran, chapter 91, verses 7 and 8, Allah says that he put into the soul both good and evil. Whereas in Christianity, we understand that God is good and created the world good, and evil is an absence or rejection of God. It's not something God put within us. And so this is a very crucial distinction, because if you understand that that God is good and created the universe, then the universe is also good, and you can understand or expect, as David was explaining earlier, expect consistency. when you observe it. Whereas if Allah is absolute will and can be good or evil, and you cannot say anything really about him, because that would be chaining Allah's hand, as the Jews are accused of doing in chapter 5, verse 64, then you can't have any basis for science. It's all speculation based on what Allah is not bound to ever do. He might do something else tomorrow.
Now, Robert, we just heard from a good friend who was talking about, hey, while Europeans were busy fighting each other, there was unity. There was unity in the Muslim world. Christians were fighting, Muslims had unity and peace. And this is why science really, really took off. And for the life of me, I can't think of which time period he's thinking of that's relevant to science, because they were fighting from the very beginning, weren't they?
Yes. And he told us, didn't he, which time period he was talking about? He was talking about up through the 13th century. So I believe he said from the 5th to the 13th. So that only applies to from the 7th to the 13th when you're talking about Islam. But first you've got the rightly guided caliphates, the Khalifa Rashidun, and 3 of the 4 were murdered.
3 of the 4 original
were murdered.
3 of the 4 original rightly guided caliphs. So all of them companions of Muhammad, and they're all murdered.
Yeah, and not only was Ali murdered, the last one, but Aisha, Muhammad's famous child bride, led a civil war against him and got Muawiyah ultimately to supplant him as caliph.
Hold on.
Massive civil war. Yes.
Wait. So you're telling us here, this guy's talking about what great unity there was. You're talking about the first generation of Muslims. And you said Aisha and Ali. So you're saying Aisha, whose title in Islam is the mother of the faithful, marched an army out against Ali, whose title in Islam is the commander of the faithful. So you're saying the mother of the faithful waged war against the commander of the faithful? And I'm guessing that thousands of Muslims, some of whom had on each side of this war had fought alongside Muhammad at the battles of Badr and Uhud and so on, and they're slaughtering each other over a disagreement?
You are correct, sir. And it didn't end there, of course, because then after you have Muawiyah defeat Ali, then you've got Hussein, that is in the lineage of Ali, being defeated by what was the guy's name? What was his Muawiyah's son? I'm blanking on it. Uzayd. Anyway, he kills him at Karbala in 680, and that's the beginning of the Sunni Shiite split. Then you've got the Umayyad Caliphate, which kills all the Shiite leaders, all the Shiite imams, one after the other. And the Umayyad Caliphate is the lineage of Muawiyah that becomes a hereditary monarchy in Islam until it is violently overthrown in 750 by the Abbasids. And then you've got dissident Umayyads forming the Caliphate of Cordoba in Spain in the 10th century. You've got them being supplanted by the Almohads in the 11th century. You've got the Shiite Fatimid Caliphate around the same time in Egypt. You've got the Mughals in India, who never accepted any of the caliphates, and they're all fighting each other. So I don't know at what point he can't even identify at any point in his 600 or 700 year period that there was actually peace and unity in the Islamic world, if he really knew anything about it.
Yeah, and this is it really seems like these people who absorb some idea from some college professor 20 some years ago, and it just kind of gives them a feeling of, this is what I feel must have been the case back then. Christians over here slaughtering each other, and Muslims over there living in peace and harmony until Christians taught them that they need to fight and stuff. And then it's just all fantasy. It's not based upon any study, any research, any facts at all. But as long as it makes you feel like you're the good one in the discussion, hey, I'm the good tolerant one, not like all these other bigots and so on. You can't pry these people's views out of them, no matter how insane they are.
That's always it.
Robert, there's actually a study that was done called The Influence of Religion on Interstate Armed Conflict, Government, Religious Preference, and First Use of Force by Davis Brown. He looked at 3 religions, Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism. Buddhism was non-significant. It didn't correlate with more war and conflict or less. Christianity was negatively. So if you're a Christian state, you're far more likely to engage in war. It's negatively correlated with war. Islam, to your surprise, in the study was positively associated with more war and conflict. So one was positively, that's Islam. Buddhism, non-significant. Christianity, negatively associated with war.
What a surprise.
But don't tell him that, because this guy has never heard of any of that. All right, let's get back to this video, because I think he's going to talk about Islam in Spain, I think. Let's see.
Yeah.
City on Earth today could compare to what Baghdad was. It would have been a combination of New York, Tokyo, and the Vatican. Another huge similarity between...
And both you guys know, anytime you want to respond to something stupid this guy's saying, just tell me stop. Just yell stop or something.
New York City and Baghdad was that they had a large Jewish population that actually lived in safety. While Christian Europe was massacring or force converting Jewish populations left and right, and the Byzantine Empire was doing it on a slightly less horrifying level, the Jewish population got to coexist with Christians, Muslims, and anyone of any other faith as long as they paid what? The jizya, the tax? The caliphates.
I remember hearing...
Okay, hold on.
I remember... No, Robert, I remember hearing that specifically over and over again in like 2002. So in various... in college and online and so on. So how can anyone argue with that?
Well, in the first place, the idea that it was just the tax ignores the rest of the verse. The jizya is mentioned in chapter 9, verse 29, and it goes on to say that they not only pay the jizya, they pay it with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. You might miss the significance of that unless you look into the Hadith and the Tafsir, and then you see that the standard understanding is that the dhimmis have to be humiliated when they pay the jizya. They have to be shown that they are in a subservient position and that the Muslims have hegemony. They are to be, there's some regulations say, some legal scholars say, strike them on the back of the neck when they pay the tax. Zamakhshari in the 13th century actually said, spit in their mouths as they pay the tax. The whole idea is to show how degraded they are, that these are not people on your level who can just go about their business and everything's great, except that they just have to pay this little tax like everybody else. It's completely fictional. The Jews in the Islamic world were subject to, and the Christians as well, a superstructure of oppression, humiliation, and degradation. And the best indication of how that compares to the Christian world is the beginning of the 20th century. The beginning of the 20th century, before all the bloodshed and everything else we can argue about that. But in 1900, there were 18 million Jews in the world, 17 million were in Europe, and 1 million were in the Islamic world. There's a reason for that. They were voting with their feet.
Indeed. But I want to verify what Robert is saying. So this guy says, hey, Christians and Jews lived fine. Right, someone's microphone is rubbing up against something because I can hear it scratching.
That would be Robert's. Yeah, I muted myself. It's not me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got this cast, and I hit it against the desk.
Okay. No, it sounds like your mic is rubbing up against something. It's like a It's like a rubbing.
I'm not used to carrying around this parking meter all the time. It's
no.
I'm saying like even right now, it sounds like your mic is rubbing up against something.
Now it's not moving, so I don't understand. It's just right here, stationary.
Okay. All right. We'll see. Yeah, it's not making the noise now. Let's just check on, because this guy says, hey, Christians and Jews are fine as long as they pay the jizya, and he just passes by that like that's nothing terribly significant. So here's 929. So it's a command to fight those who believe not in God nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by God and his apostle, nor acknowledge the religion of truth, even if they are of the people of the book, so that's Jews and Christians, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. So pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. Now let's just check out Ibn Kathir commenting on what jizya is. Paying jizya is a sign of kufr, unbelief, and disgrace. Allah said, until they pay the jizya, if they do not choose to embrace Islam, with willing submission, in defeat and subservience, and feel themselves subdued, disgraced, humiliated, and belittled. We are to be disgraced, humiliated, and belittled. Therefore, Muslims are not allowed to honor the people of the Dhimma, or that's us, or elevate, that's people who pay the jizya, or elevate them above Muslims, for they are miserable, disgraced, and humiliated. Muslim, so that's Sahih Muslim, recorded from Abu Huraira that the Prophet said, do not initiate the salam, so greeting of peace, to the Jews and Christians. And if you meet any of them on a road, force them to the narrowest alley. So this is what this guy's just sort of brushed aside and said, hey, as long as you are doing this, as long as you're in a state of defeat, subservience, as long as you've been disgraced, humiliated, belittled, and you accept your status as a second-class citizen who is constantly being humiliated, and you're paying money to the Muslim community to acknowledge their superiority and your inferiority, hey, everything's fine. And guess what? From an Islamic perspective, yes, as long as they're keeping their mouths shut, not preaching, showing just showing that they regard you as inferior and paying you tribute money, yeah, leave them alone. Well, that's great. That's great. That's a wonderful world we all want to live in. All right, let's see a little more. See what this guy has to say.
We're much more tolerant of diversity than any of their current peers.
Muslims were much more tolerant of diversity than their current peers. Wow, 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 wow.
And while Europe did have one unifying language, which was Latin, where the educated people could speak to one another through a lot of the countries, that was a luxury of the very few. But the entirety of the Muslim Caliphate was unified by one language, from Spain to Persia, which was Arabic. Yes, of course, all of these other countries had their own language, but they were unified by one common living language that was much more easily accessible.
What?
Persia don't speak Arabic.
Yeah, I know. You had people who had memorized Quran verses and so on in Arabic, but had no clue what they're saying. That's the same thing as today. It's like that today.
And the reason Latin was used in Europe at the time was because as like Germanic tribes came in early on, they had their own languages. You have English, French, German developed. And a lot of the clergy are like, we still need to communicate with each other. So they just kept using Latin. It was a really good tool so that you could get something by the time of Galileo, publish something, and everyone across Europe could read it because they all had to learn Latin if they wanted to be like an educator.
It's exactly like what he denies. He says that Arabic is this wonderful universal language in the Islamic world, whereas Latin was the language only of the elites in Europe. Actually, Arabic was the language of the elites in much of what we think of today as the Islamic world. In Persia, it still is. The Islamic scholars, of course, know Arabic, and you got to know Arabic to say your prayers. But otherwise, the people don't speak Arabic. Nor do they in Pakistan, Afghanistan, many other countries that are majority Muslim. But also in areas that now speak Arabic, the native language was often violently suppressed. The Caliph al-Hakim in the early part of the 11th century actually forbade the use of the Coptic language in Egypt on pain of death. And it was even a mother to her child could not speak Coptic. If she was heard, she would be killed. And so this is how all the Egyptians speak Arabic today. And it's not just Egypt either.
No, Robert, because this guy just said Islam was much more tolerant than everywhere else.
Than something like Latin. Fun fact, Charlemagne, the leader of the Frankish Empire, which was the largest empire that Europe saw during the Middle Ages, was actually friends with Harun al-Rashid, the leader of the Abbasid Caliphate. They never met, but they had a very healthy diplomatic relationship to the point of Harun al-Rashid sending him an elephant. But the greatest gift that Rashid gave Charlemagne by far was a water clock, which is something that the Europeans have never seen and won't for the next few centuries. And while Europe was going through its own caste system under feudalism, proto-capitalism was growing under the caliphates. And yes, it was the Crusades.
Yeah, well,
The feudalism was invented in France in the 19th century and projected back on the medieval period. No one in the medieval period knew what feudalism was. Again, this is another 19th century myth. They were trying to reinvent or trying to explain what happened in the Middle Ages. They came up with a system called feudalism and then just projected it on the past. That was never actually a system in the Middle Ages. It was far more complex, and people don't realize this because the history of the Middle Ages was so distorted by things like the conflict thesis and other writers from the 1800s, that is.
And it's just the methodology of this guy is absolutely insane. So, hey, Bruno was executed. Do you see? This is the relationship between Christianity and science. Oh, well, he leaves out the fact that Bruno's execution had nothing to do with science, but he made it sound like that. But that becomes the pattern. Matter of fact, as soon as he mentioned Copernicus, who didn't want to publish his book during his lifetime because he thought everyone's going to make fun of him for being an idiot, waits until after his death, then it's published. He portrays it. You see, this proves the ongoing endless conflict between Christianity and science. That's the conclusion he jumps to. But then, look, this Muslim leader sent Charlemagne a water clock. You see, this is where science comes from. You see, he gave them a device, and then Europeans, they reverse engineered it, and then they built up all their technology. That's where technology came from in the West. It's freaking nuts, man. Like the entire methodology is
Real
insane.
Quick,
What's up?
The book, a good book on this, Why Feudalism is Fiction. It wasn't actually a system in the Middle Ages. Fiefs and Vassals, the Medieval Evidence Reinterpreted by Susan Reynolds. I started reading it recently. It's really interesting. I need to get back to it. But yeah, this is all just, again, myths from the 19th century projected onto the past.
And wow.
Which forcefully opened up trade between the caliphates and the rest of Europe. And the Renaissance, which was the launch pad for European advancement, would not have happened without the caliphate's preservation of the works of Plato, Aristotle, and a host of...
Hold on.
Wait. Go ahead.
The caliphate's preservation of the works of Plato and all that. This.
Hey, one second, Robert. Could you tap on your microphone?
Tap on it?
Yeah. No sound. It's picking up through something with your headphones, and I think it's brushing against your shirt or something like that. So see if there's a spot to select your microphone. Yeah, I think it's picking up like your headphones or something like that.
Okay, there was no microphone. I mean, the microphone I have here wasn't listed. I don't know why. Because I know it's plugged in. I checked that earlier.
Let me see.
Okay, how's that though? I changed microphones in the system.
That's better, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So
look.
Just so.
Oh wait, Robert.
Go ahead.
Robert.
Just one thing. This is so commonly said, and it's absolutely false. But millions of people assume nowadays that the Muslims preserved various classics of ancient Greek philosophy when the Christians were throwing them out because they were pagan. And it was only because of that the Renaissance took place in Europe. In the first place, that's false in the sense of who was preserving them. And again, from Religion of Peace, my own book from 2007, Aristotle's work was preserved in Arabic not by Muslims, but by Christians like the 5th century priest Probus of Antioch, who introduced Aristotle to the Arabic-speaking world. Another Christian, Hunayn ibn Ishaq, translated many works by Aristotle, Galen, Plato, and Hippocrates into Syriac. His son then translated them into Arabic. A Syrian Christian, Yahya ibn Adi, translated other works of philosophy into Arabic and wrote one of his own, The Reformation of Morals. His student, another Christian named Abu Ali Isa ibn Zurra, translated Aristotle and others from Syriac into Arabic. The first Arabic language medical treatise was written by a Christian priest and translated into Arabic by a Jewish doctor in the year 683. The first hospital was founded in Baghdad, this guy's favorite city, during the Abbasid Caliphate, but not by a Muslim, by a Nestorian Christian. And so on and on and on. Not only that, but he speaks a little bit later about the fall of Constantinople and all the scholars going from Constantinople into Europe. That was a big spark of the Renaissance. It was not because of Muslims preserving the books. As a matter of fact, shortly before the fall of Constantinople, as you can read all about in another book of mine, Empire of God, How the Byzantines Saved Civilization. In the year 1439, there was an attempt at a reunion council in Florence between the Western Church and the Eastern Church, or what we think of today as the Roman Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox. And the Patriarch of Constantinople and the Emperor of the Romans, or the Byzantine Emperor as he's known today, came to Florence to talk to the Pope and the Western Church leaders about reunion. And the Patriarch, I believe it was the Emperor, had a friend, Gemistos Platon, who was a Platonic philosopher, a Neoplatonist of the 15th century. And he was a great scholar of Plato and Aristotle. And he said, come along to Florence with us, it'll be great. So he goes to Florence, Gemistos goes to Florence with them, but when he gets there, he's bored because he's not a theologian. He's not interested in the theological debates. So he's got nothing to do. He's knocking around Florence all day. He starts giving lectures on Plato and Aristotle. And the Florentines are in awe. They've never heard this stuff before. There were only 2 books of Plato that were preserved in Western Europe before Gemistos came and started giving his lectures. And he is the guy, forgotten today, who brought Plato and Aristotle into the West and sparked the Renaissance. That had nothing to do with Islam at all.
And there's a book called Scribes and Scholars. On page 50, they say there was no general attempt to alter the school curriculum by banishing the classical authors, talking about Western Europe. You're right. They just lacked a lot of the of the works of Plato and Aristotle. But what they had, they kept teaching. Alcuin was, under Charlemagne, was trying to spread literacy around Europe, not just among the elites, but among any he could. So like this idea that, and Toby E. Huff, in his book, The Rise of Early Modern Science, says that in the Islamic world, there were times, yes, they preserved the classical works in their libraries, but there were times they would go through and do book burnings. They'd be like, you know what, this Greek philosopher, that's bad. It's contradicting Islam. Let's gather a bunch of these up and burn them. This is in Toby E. Huff's book. So there were book burnings in the Islamic world by Muslims who thought that sometimes the foreign sciences were going against what the religious science were, so they had to get rid of them.
Well, that goes back to Al-Ghazali. It's very important we mention Al-Ghazali in this. Al-Ghazali was a great philosopher in the late part of the 11th century and the beginning. He died in 1111, and he's considered one of the towering Islamic philosophers, but actually he's the killer of Islamic philosophy and of Islamic science. And he wrote a book called The Incoherence of the Philosophers, in which he attacks Avicenna and Averroes and all the rest of them as heretics. And he says that they are engaging in speculations that disagree with the Quran, therefore they are heretics and should be put to death. That's on the last page of his book. They should be put to death. And that was the death of Islamic philosophy. Philosophy and science at the beginnings are deeply intertwined, because you're assuming that, like we were saying before, that the world is created by a good God, a God who's consistent. And so you look out into the universe and see how he fashioned the world. If you don't have that, then you don't look out into the world and see any kind of order or coherence to it. But it was Al-Ghazali who said that was all heretical, who really put paid to the idea of innovation in Islamic philosophy and science. And this guy doesn't even seem to be aware that he exists.
He doesn't seem to know anything about Islam other than, like, he looked up, hey, were there some sort of schools before Christianity or before Christian universities or something like that? Seems to be the extent of his research. Anyway, let's see if he's got anything else.
Greek and Roman thinkers. But all of that came to an end when the Mongol invasions took place and they destroyed all of the great cities, including Baghdad, which was decimated. All of the libraries were burnt down and tons of the books were thrown into the rivers, to the point where people said that the rivers ran black. It was the complete and total destruction wrought by the Mongolian Empire.
So it's not just Christians who are bad, it's Mongols. Apparently it's everyone who's not a Muslim. So Islam, great, everything else bad, and everyone else ruined it for the Muslim. Little side note. I mean, talking about resilience. I mean, the Jews get persecuted over and over and over again. People try to wipe them out over and over again, and they just keep thriving. They always find a way to thrive. like the bubonic plague killed like a third of the population of Europe, and then you get the Renaissance. There's something like, it doesn't matter what's happening. I mean, World War II, Europe gets bombed down to rubble. They just rebuild it. There's a kind of resilience in certain cultures. And yet in Islam, it'll be, no, but the reason we're so far behind is because what the Mongols did so long ago. But that's why, and think about what that Crusader did 1,000 years ago. That's why things suck right now. That's why we have all these problems. It's like anything that's ever happened to them in history means you just, it's all over. It's over. It's over.
And the idea the Mongols burned those libraries is actually disputed. Some of the early sources don't mention it. It's only mentioned in later texts. So I'm not even sure if that's accurate.
Let's see.
Allowed the caliphates to be easily conquered by the small Ottoman Empire, which eventually grew to become the Muslim seat of power as we knew it. There are a lot of horrible things to be said about the Ottoman Empire. I would look up Janissaries because that's...
Hey, I think this guy's like, it's only Arabs that are great. So Christians bad, Mongols bad, Ottomans bad, Turks bad, Arabs great, and the great source of everything good that's ever happened. Something along those lines.
Yeah, I did look up this Baghdad thing. Yeah, the main libraries in Baghdad were still in use in the first half of the 14th century. So it doesn't seem they were just burned and destroyed by the Mongols. This seems to be a myth that was created later, but I want to look more into this.
Pure tragedy. And the Ottoman Empire got to enjoy the wealth and prosperity brought about by the caliphates for centuries until that empire itself met its eventual demise. And after 1453, the Renaissance was spurred even further as the city of Constantinople, which was the seat of the Byzantine Empire, fell to the Ottomans, and all of the scholars of that great city and empire fled to the rest of Europe. And yes, I'm aware that there is a huge gap in...
Why would they flee? Why wouldn't they want to be in the Muslim world?
Why
would
Turks bad?
Yeah. Okay. So Turks bad. If it had been
the Arabs had conquered it, it would be great.
If it had been Arabs, then they would have all lived in peace and harmony. But those Ottomans.
Now between the Middle Eastern countries and, let's say, the West. But Islam is not at fault for this lack of advancement, just like Christianity is not responsible for all the scientific development over the past 5 centuries.
False.
Did you just catch that?
Absolutely false.
Did you just catch what he said? False. Islam isn't responsible for bad things, just like Christianity isn't responsible for any good things. He just said that.
The consensus of modern historians on science is just the complete opposite. It's that Christianity is like the greatest pillar of modern science. And this doesn't just come from Christians like David Ungariano, Noah J. Ephron. These aren't Christians. And they're saying, yeah, Christianity is the reason we have modern science as it is today. Whereas Islam did contribute, it also limited it and prevented it from becoming its own institution. Christians came up with the separation of church and state. So secular institutions could develop on their own apart from religion. Islam didn't have that. Science had to be subject to whatever the Islamic teaching was. Therefore, it could never become anything great. And again, as you mentioned, Robert, with that one guy, Al-Ghazali.
Al-Ghazali.
Yeah. When he shut that down, we start to see the decline. All the jurisprudence in Islam had been set. The legal authorities have made their state on so many decisions. That was now basically dogma for the most part, and it could not be questioned. Therefore, there was no reason for any sort of more development, more sort of like figuring out new ways of doing things, because everything had been set, shut up, do as you're told. Whereas in Europe, they didn't have that. They had a much more liberating system, allowing science to become modern science.
Yeah, Robert, see if here's my overall assessment of when these things take off in Islam. Islam expands and conquers, and as it expands and conquers, it encounters other people's stuff. Just like they're taking the ladies as war booty, and just like they're taking their goods and so on, they're getting a hold of their books. And when they'd get a hold of some new books, some new information, if it's philosophy or science, they have to go to the caliph and say, hey, can we see what use can be made of this for Islam? It takes off for a while. Islam ultimately suffocates it because, as we were talking about earlier, on the one hand, Islam, it has this view that you're not the sort of thing that goes out and figures stuff. You have to sit back and be passive and be told what to think by Allah. And if Allah does not tell you what to think, you just have no idea what to think. So there's that combined with this retrograde force that Islam always is, namely that the sort of core message of Islam is that the creator of the universe is absolutely obsessed with you living, breathing, walking, talking, speaking, and even going to the bathroom the way a 7th century Arab would. And that's like his main focus in the world. The focus is not making advancements, exploring the universe, anything like that. The focus of the creator of the universe is making sure that you live, speak, dress, and so on like a 7th century Arab. That's his cardinal obsession. And once you have that idea at the heart of your religion, anything that takes off is going to be suffocated real quick like.
Well, if you want to move on to the
parasitical.
real quick, I think we've got enough of this first video. After this, if you want to move on to the next video, I think we're good on.
Do you even want to go on to the next video? I'm kind of tired of this dude.
It's up to you. I'm going to post a response. He responded back to me. So this was his first video. I responded to it. And then Friday, he posted another response to me. I'm going to upload another response to him tomorrow and just show that he cited a bunch of sources that disagree with him. He didn't do any good research. It was a disaster. You think this video was bad? His second one was far worse. He should be embarrassed. He said he was willing to learn. Instead, he just doubled down on the nonsense. So I'll be posting another response to him tomorrow, regardless.
Okay, so IP, what are your thoughts? Should we go into the next video, or because I have to say I'm not interested in anything this dude says after this. I'm like, you are a clueless ball of emotion who absorbed a bunch of stupid ideas 20 years ago, and you don't have the capacity, apparently, despite what you say, you don't have the capacity to advance beyond these stupid ideas.
I'm just looking up this Mongol claim right now, and what I'm finding just on like a quick search is, no, that's a myth invented after the 15th century. Actually, early when they went in, they may have burned some books, but they didn't make the Tigris black. This seems to be a myth of history, sort of like how they'll say Christians burned the Library of Alexandria, which is another myth. So I don't know if the Mongols actually did that. In fact, some are saying that when the Mongols took over, there was actually a flourishing period because there was more trade and exchange of ideas. So this seems to be just another myth of history.
Well, this guy's up on a lot of those. He also said, you were talking about Dante earlier, and there's an actual legend that arose 100 years after Dante died, that he was hauled before the Inquisition and accused of heresy, and he wrote a poem defending his own orthodoxy. And the poem is a forgery. It's not by Dante. There isn't a single scholar in the world who thinks that he wrote it. But the whole story apparently was probably fabricated by the guy that wrote the poem to try to pass off his work as Dante's. And this guy thinks, Dante was hauled before the Inquisition. There's no contemporary evidence of that at all.
Here, David, I got an idea.
One second. I just wanted to point out, what I find interesting about this dude, is he's giving the sort of same Arab supremacist view as I see on certain like Dawa sites and Dawa articles and so on, in the sense that anything good came from the Arab Muslim world. Anything bad was inflicted upon it by outside forces. The Ottomans, the Mongols, the Christians, everyone ruined it. Other than that, Arab Islam would have just flourished and blessed the entire world into one giant sugar-coated raindrop. But everyone else ruined it. But there's this idea that I see so many times from Dawa guys that and you have to blame something. You can't blame Islam for having any sort of problem. So it's always, if this happened, it's because of them. It's because of them. It's because of them. We're just passive victims of circumstances here in the world. That's what he sounds like. But it's weird having this dude spout the same sort of nonsense that I hear from Dawa guys constantly.
Here, David, I'm screen sharing right now the video I'm going to upload tomorrow. If you want to play like a part of that, I just got a caption to it. But if you want to just play like the first minute, you can kind of, I'll address his second video easily tomorrow. But I even added some.
Well, let's go ahead and watch this. Let's go ahead and let him finish this out. There's 1 minute left.
Centuries. The printing press is what allowed Europeans to read the Bible in the vernacular, and the Ottoman Empire resisted the adoption of that. While Europe was catching up to the advancements of the Middle East and North Africa, the Ottomans were strengthening their grip and, quite primitive compared to their predecessors. While Europe was advancing
the Ottomans
further
were
and
primitive
forward,
compared to the
despite
Arabs?
the influence of the Christian church, the Ottoman Empire only cared about cementing their grasp and conquering their neighbors. By the mid-1800s, while Europe was industrializing heavily...
What planet? They only cared about conquering... Has this guy followed... Just the dude, just look at the expansion in the first century of Islam. Just the first century. Just century number one. Just one. Just that first little bit. Talking about, oh no, it's the Ottomans. They were obsessed with... Oh my goodness, what a dope.
Yeah. The Ottoman Empire was still living like it was the 1600s. That allowed Europe to carve up the Middle East to do whatever they wanted with. And here we are. Now, the Westerners are thinking that they have always had this cultural superiority as they read Plato, Aristotle, and all of these other great thinkers from history, and they have no idea that the only reason why they can look upon these words is because the Arabs and the Muslim caliphates saved those works. My name is the Geo Hussar. No, I am not Muslim. I am not Christian. I am not Jewish. I have no horse in the race of Abrahamic religions.
Oh, you don't?
I just think that y'all should know that the Arabs and the Muslims in general brought us a lot of what we have today. Thanks for watching.
You can see there
behind I just think y'all should know.
250,000 followers.
I just think y'all should. Well, that'd work on TikTok now. That works on TikTok. You have a bunch of 14-year-old people who don't know anything, have never studied anything, they don't know anything about history. This guy's telling them a bunch of stuff, and he's sounding confident. And well, Arab civilization was the greatest thing. It was everyone else's fault. This is a non-Muslim, non-Arab, Arab supremacist. That is some weird, wild stuff. All right, so you wanted me to try and play this video? I do not know if this will. I do not know if this will actually play with audio here. So let's find out. Let's see.
I think I have to play it. So I hit play.
Yeah, let's see if it plays with sound. Yeah, that's not me. It's not playing with sound.
Oh, darn it.
Yeah.
You and your ancient technology.
No, there's I have to mess around with the settings. I just it's rough to do in the middle of a live stream.
Is that his video?
This is his response to me, and I'm going to be posting
his own handle.
I know that he did. It's really weird, and it was like, what are you doing? But I'm going to respond to him tomorrow. Put out a bunch of stuff, show that he's just completely wrong here.
Wow! What a dope. This is bad.
Yeah, I
stuff.
thought he was pretty smart when I first came across him because he was doing geopolitics, which seems to be his area of expertise. But when he dives into history, it's just like, dude, stop! You're embarrassing yourself. This is bad.
It's pretty terrible. Glad you are responding. All right, Robert. Any final thoughts on that guy's stuff?
You know, actually, David, earlier you were talking about how Islam comes in and takes what the infidels that they've conquered have and uses it insofar as it can be used to further Islam. This is very important to note that Islam is essentially and inherently parasitical, and it's parasitical economically as well as culturally and intellectually. And so economically, it's laid out in the Quran and in Islamic law and tradition that you subjugate the conquered people, you collect the jizya. You can track the economic prosperity of the caliphates of the Ottoman empires as the last caliphate and all the even the earlier ones, that when the subject people were relatively prosperous, then they were paying a lot of jizya and the empire prospered. But as the subject people began to be bled dry and so completely subjugated and relegated to the lowest rung of society, they couldn't pay significant jizya. The empire went into decline. This is why the Ottoman Empire became the sick man of Europe. But it's the same thing intellectually, that they came in, they conquered the Byzantines, they conquered Constantinople, and they took the Greek philosophy. You could say that they got it. The Arabs took it earlier, absolutely, and they were using it, but then they didn't do anything with it. They were branded heretical. It was up to the Christians in Europe to do something with what the pagan Greeks had worked out philosophically and scientifically. It's exactly the same kind of motion. It's essentially a parasitical culture.
And somehow that parasitical culture just couldn't stand against the Mongols, the Ottomans, I don't know what to do, man. He's making it sound so great. and yet it's just a perpetual victim somehow of everyone else. It's weird.
That's the problem with all the Islamic apologists. They all make it sound wonderful, and then you have to ask them, then why do you keep losing? Why is the Islamic world in such terrible shape? Oh, because of the Jews.
Oh, yeah, because of the Jews and the Christians and this and that and the communists and the feminists. That's why we're so weak. And it's always someone else's
colonialism.
Fault. Yeah, colonialism. That's what made us so weak. Well,
I've discussed this study before throughout my channel and other places. There's a study by Roland to Salem who looked at Christianity and Islam. And he looked at the way they sort of function on a regional level in a society. He found that when it comes to things like voice and accountability in government, citizen empowerment, political stability, political transformation, the ability to create good political transformation, Christianity was positively associated with all these things, and Islam just wasn't. And the study is the role of Protestantism in democratic consolidation among transitional states. So he looked at Protestantism, Catholicism, and Islam. Islam was just non-significant anyway.
Because of the Mongols. IP, the Mongols. You're ignoring the Mongols, man.
Yeah. Catholicism was positive in a slightly less way, and then Protestant was positive in a more stronger way. But so Christianity makes better political states with more citizen empowerment. Islam just doesn't. And that was the result of Roland F. to Salem study.
Well, it stands to reason. It's in the Hadith. Muhammad says, "Obey your ruler, even if he is an Ethiopian with a head like a raisin," which most people quote to talk about racism. But it's also true that it's a recipe for authoritarianism. He's saying you obey your ruler, even if he's the most outlandish person I can think of. You obey him no matter what.
Indeed. All right, guys. So wanted to give everyone that overview of... Guys, there's a reason that people like this are able to spout complete nonsense on social media. There aren't enough people there to correct them. So the solution to the spread of complete nonsense is doing away with an atmosphere of ignorance. So people just have to learn. People just have to learn some basics of history and so on, so they can respond to people like this. It's the same dynamic with Dawah. A Dawah guy goes into an area, there's a bunch of people who don't know anything about Islam, allows him to say whatever he wants about Islam, and no one's there to raise a hand. You got this guy on TikTok talking to a bunch of 14, 15-year-olds. People don't know any better. He can say whatever he wants, and then just sort of, I guess he thrives in that sort of environment. So what's the solution to that? Well, I suggest everyone watching IP's videos that he's putting out, get a copy of the history of jihad that Robert's talking about. I'll put a link in the description box. Check those things out. Learn the material. You can't just say, well, IP made a video. You have to actually learn the material in IP's video so that you're the one there in the comment section correcting
And this is
nonsense.
why I put a bunch of quotes in my videos, so you don't even have to quote me. You can just quote the scholars I'm citing. I put quotes in there like crazy for that reason.
Indeed. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to go through super chats. I don't know how long you guys want to stay. I think, Robert, you go to sleep fairly early because you're old.
Yeah, about an hour ago. So,
yeah.
Good night, gentlemen.
All right. Catch you later. Catch you later. All right, IP, you can hang out as long as or as short as you want. Just going to go through some super chats.
For it.
All right, man. Let's go through some of these. I'm a university math major, and it's beautiful to see intricate patterns in the mind-boggling world of math. For me, it's hard to imagine that it wasn't created by an intelligent, supernatural higher being. That's exactly my thinking on this issue. It's like, I mean, here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. So everything around you in every direction, there's mathematics going on. Every particle, everywhere. All of reality, there's mathematics going on. In my view, mathematics is a language, and that means everything is speaking from every direction. It makes no sense on atheism. It just doesn't. There's no reason to think that if a universe formed by random, at random or something like this, it's going to be like this this sophisticated system of mathematics. Does make sense from a theistic perspective.
Someone just said in the chat, Michael's the kid in school who always raised his hand and wanted to know how many sources were too many. I actually asked one of my college professors that one time when I was getting my master's. I was like, how long can my bibliography be? Because do you want... So yeah, that was me.
That is a little bit nerdy, but not Mike. Fortunately, not Mike Winger nerdy. But yeah, agree completely on the mathematics. In fact, like to cover more on that because this has been developed by various philosophers and apologists and so on. So, hey, IP, quick question. What are some of the best books on the Tetragrammaton?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about pronunciation because I think most just say it's either Yahweh. An earlier form might be Yahoo. I've heard Yahweh. Check out a book by Trigme Manager, In Search of God. Another one might be good on this. Mark S. Smith, God in Translation would be good. I'd say start with those two and then see the books they cite because I think they would cite more that could give you a better path. So maybe start with those two. One's older, one's newer, and should give you a good place to go. But I think the most likely pronunciation is going to be Yahweh.
And let's see. Apostate of Allah says, how are you guys here trying to discredit Islam when the Bible doesn't have anything in it? Like Surah 1666, it's a scientific miracle. Hey, apostate of Allah, we know you're joking, but that was actually the first scientific miracle of Islam I ever encountered. So I was in prison. This was at Stanton Correctional Center, and I became friends with the imam there, like the Muslim community there had their own inmate imam and so on. And he said my mind was going to be blown by this video they have on the scientific miracles of Islam. So he sat me down for this scientific miracles video. And he was just, oh my goodness. And what would happen in every case is it would quote a Quran verse and then would go into all this scientific stuff. And I'm sitting there thinking none of that was actually in that verse. We're going all this scientific and all this graphics and stuff like this. And then how could this have been known by Muhammad? It's like the verse didn't say any of that stuff. Verse didn't say any of that stuff. So what's apostate of Allah here talking about? I'll read the Pickthall here. And lo, in the cattle there is a lesson for you. We give you to drink of that which is in their bellies, from betwixt the refuse and the blood, pure milk, palatable to the drinkers. So, hey, cows make milk.
What even is this?
What?
This is not a miracle.
Oh, what are you talking about, man? Cows make milk. Where'd you think milk came from there, IP?
You
Come
got
on.
me.
Okay, thank you.
Like that.
Yeah, you wouldn't have known that. You wouldn't have known that if Allah didn't tell you. It's amazing. How could Allah have known that cows make milk? Again, I'm not joking. That was the first. And in the video, they went into all these details of how cows produce milk and stuff like this. And then, how could this have been known? It's so dumb. Oh, boy. Robert McLean says, D. Wood, thank you that I'm not like Mike Winger. IP, have mercy on me, a wingaling. And one of us went away justified. It's me. Muslims, no inventions from 7th century, but happy to have cars, phones, washing machines, and all Western inventions. They don't feel shame or being hypocrite. Oh, now to be fair, they did come up with, again, medical advancements, medical instruments, and so on. They did produce inventions and so on. And so the issue is, and guess what? That's just what you expect from an expanding empire. They're going to encounter all sorts of things and be able to make connections and be able to take advantage of things and so on. And so you did have some flourishing. It just doesn't last. It never lasts in Islam. Islam is this suffocating force that just suffocates everything.
I mean, they started out pretty well, and then when they used science as much as they could to benefit Islam, they just gave up, and we see the decline in the Arab world, whereas in Europe, it's exploding.
When the West was pro-Christianity, you had scientific flourishing. Now that Christianity is in decline, people ask, what is a woman? Yeah, you'll still have scientific flourishing, but yeah, that makes a point in the sense that the prediction of the, and I'll have a video coming out on this. The prediction of the new atheist was, hey, if we just get past Christianity, we'll have this new scientific utopia. People are going to get more rational and more scientific. And as soon as people start, get past Christianity, everyone starts going insane and entertaining any stupid idea, no matter how unscientific it is. And then you also had I don't know if you've seen this, like the spike in witches. Like there's like as people turn away from Christianity, there's a spike in witches. It's funny. It's funny stuff.
Yeah. Well, when you move away from the idea there's a one rational creator that governs the whole universe by his own rational thoughts and places laws that flow from his nature that he's not going to violate, you're going to get science. When you move away from that, you're going to go back to pagan ideas. So you know, horoscopes, witches, this nonsense. And that's what we're seeing a rise of, unfortunately. Like metaphysical stores I've seen pop up over Tucson, for example. It's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Why you beef with Mike Winger? New to the channel. Why do I beef with Mike Winger? Don't get me started. Like where do I begin? His nerd face, his nerd hair, his nerd glasses, his nerd shirts. Literal nerd shirt. He wears a literal nerd shirt. His nerd videos, his nerd voice, everything is like nerd all the way down. What do you expect me? Oh, great. Like the nerdiest person in the history of humanity. Yay. That's my favorite person ever. Come on. Be realistic. Rogue Provisionist said, Mike Winger, the kind of guy that cries before bed because all the vitriol and rhetoric from David and his followers. D. Wood warns about cult tactics, but he probably does cry himself to sleep over this stuff. My goodness, saw on Jai and DOC, watched Muhammad Hijab movie, Raging Narcissist, which was so cringe and bad. I don't know if he is a worse actor or if he's a worse actor or Dawa preacher. Yeah, I don't know if you know this, IP, but apparently Muhammad Hijab came out with a movie, or he's coming out with a movie on his own channel.
Watch party.
I don't know. I could anticipate. I was like, one, it's going to be completely narcissistic. And two, I don't anticipate him being a good actor. I think he'd be a pretty crap actor. But yeah, we're reluctantly going to have to check out that nonsense. But it was a matter of time, ladies and gentlemen. The Dawa was breaking down. They acknowledge that their biggest arguments were all complete nonsense and they're all based on deception. What are you going to do? You either become a gossip channel like Ali Dawa, or you try to go into acting and, hey, maybe we'll make a movie. Goat Hub says, but did Christianity start the goat lovers revolution? Didn't think so. Checkmate. Yeah, that was someone else. Hey, here you go. Question for IP. Your stream on the Exodus, why didn't you get Dr. Falk on for the response? Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. So I'll be responding to two cyber bullies on Wednesday on my channel who just made a really terrible response and made numerous historical errors. He was pretty busy, and he's not been on my channel for a while, so I mean, it just didn't work out. But don't worry, I promise you, Wednesday on my channel, we will have a ton of fun. We are going to go through their response to me, and you're going to see blunder after blunder. You're going to enjoy yourself.
You heard it here, folks. It's going to happen. Given how we say Muslims are slaves of Allah, does Bible and Quran have distinct definition or application of slave and servant? Abdullah versus Obadiah. Given how we say Muslims are slaves of Allah, no, that's what they say. In Islam, the only relationship you have with Allah is a slave to master relationship. That's the Quran. Surah 19. No one approaches Allah as anything but a slave. So it's up to you whether you be a good slave or a bad slave. And if you're a good slave, well, then Allah will like you. And if you're a bad slave, then Allah is going to punish you. But under no circumstances are you anything other than a slave. But what do you think? Any distinction between slave and servant?
So the Hebrew word is used very generally. It's used even for people that work for the king, people that just subjects of the king. This is one of the problems with trying to understand what the biblical authors meant. Again, they didn't have these distinctions like we do. So you could have someone just being called I think it's a bed is the Hebrew word, and it's just referring to someone is basically a mercenary. And then you could have someone as a chattel slave being called in a bed. So it's just a very general word, unfortunately. So you're going to have some cultural breakdowns in trying to make those comparisons.
I've always hated history, so I barely know any of this stuff. It was always boring wars, memorize these
Oh,
dates anyway. Thanks for the lesson. This IP, um, someone brought this up to me, a guy named Zach, back when I was in college. He brought up, hey, they make us take all these classes. So you're sitting here taking 3, 4, 5, 6 classes a semester and so on. And you have to learn all this stuff to take tests and write your paper and things like that. But then you forget the vast majority of it. And think about how much, like you probably remember everything, but the rest of us, we forget like 97% of the stuff that we learned from the classes. And so this guy actually suggested, I think it may have been a good idea, but he said, hey, instead of learning all this stuff and being required to learn all this stuff and then just forgetting it all, why don't you make it so that you're only learning like 10% of that, but it's reinforced over and over again, so you actually learn the entire 10%. And that would be better than just recalling like 2 or 3%. In other words, it would be better to have a smaller amount of information that's repeatedly reinforced until it actually sticks. But I'm thinking something like that here for, if you take history class or something like that, if you take history of Western civilization or something like that, or American history, there's all this stuff. But what if there was like IP? Okay, here are the essentials. These are the essential. This is what you have to know. You have to. Every Christian right now, everyone has to learn these basics, because if you do not know these basics, you're basically asking for someone to come along and manipulate you because you don't know these basics. But it seems like there needs to be some list of things that are like essential learning for everyone at this point.
Yeah, I think everyone honestly, I think a lot of biblical scholars, scientists should be taking classes in philosophy and logic, because they throw fallacies around like they're nothing. That we're going to be going over several fallacies used in this response to me on Wednesday, and how they just
hey, one second. Even that right there, right? Like if you take a logic course, you learn tons and tons of stuff. You could take logic, you could take introduction to logic, then logic 1, then logic. You could take multiple classes on logic. There's like 6 or 7 fallacies that really, really, really need to be common knowledge so that people can spot them. That's exactly what I was talking about, right? Like so that, like whatever field you're going into, science, history, whatever. By the way, guys, make sure you know this core right here of logical fallacies so that people cannot use these fallacies on you, like actually make dumb arguments and so on. But the same thing, like, okay, even if you're not in history, if you're in philosophy, here's a historical core that every person needs to know. You should put it together, man.
Yeah. I'll look into that for sure.
I think it would be good. 2 things, David. Any word from the meta dunce on apostate prophets? EO wife? What is EO? I don't know what things stand
Eastern
for.
Orthodox.
Oh, okay. Eastern Orthodox wife. After you rightly clowned Jake, I don't know if he responded. I don't follow Jake's stuff. I think he's a dope. But I don't know if you were following that, but he called he insulted AP's wife, and then we had a Quran desecration party.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, that's what we did. But yeah, I don't know if he's responded anywhere. I'm not terribly interested. Although I have to say, if he doesn't like correct himself, if he doesn't check that, if he just leaves that stuff up, we're going to keep doing it. We're going to keep. Oh, well, I will keep it up for we'll keep it up for years, just constantly going after it. But that's the issue. Hijab, Ali, these guys are narcissists, right? And you can tell, because you can say, hey, you take something down or apologize or something like that, and that will stop a ton of Quran desecration that's about to happen if you don't, and they won't do it. And what's that mean? It means they care more about their own egos than they actually care about what they're supposed to care about in Islam. And to IP, what do you make of the idolatry on both sides of the political aisle, i.e. comparing Trump to Jesus? Yeah, IP, why do you keep comparing Trump to Jesus?
Yeah, this is what happens when traditional religiosity breaks down. We start to revert to political religions. So scholars will note that, you see people sort of idealizing political figures. It's among the least churched individuals on the right, for example. So Christian symbols get reinterpreted in political ways. The political figure becomes a new Messiah type figure. And so again, this is just a result of, people leaving traditional Christianity. New atheists, like Dawkins and Harris, they're creating the worst nightmare because they're terrified of things like Christian nationalism and far-right extremism. Well, the more they attack traditional religion and try to deconvert people, they move into political religions as a replacement. So they're creating their own nightmare.
Yeah, people in the past, like Chesterton and Francis Schaeffer and so on, they pointed out what happens when you had Christianity, you had, like, they're talking about they were talking about, Chesterton talked about it in terms of like various values or virtues and things like that they're all connected in Christianity. As soon as you take out the Christian framework, they're all sort of hanging in midair, and people will pick one and like idolize it. So you'll pick like tolerance, which is good if it's connected to everything else, like wisdom and justice and all of it. If they're all connected into a coherent whole, once that which makes them a coherent whole is brushed aside, then people just turn various virtues into an idol. So tolerance, and then that just becomes the most important thing in the universe until, and it's not connected to anything else. And so you have that, but you also have that with people, ladies and gentlemen. It's not just with ideas or something like that you'll cling to and make an idol out of it. You'll cling to a person, and that'll become your new idol. So either get used to it, or have a revival. Those are your alternatives. Hippo character spins around. Oh, that is a super sticker, which I can't see. Fix this, Ecamm. I want to see the super stickers. IP, golden showers is what they do. That comes from Muhammad Hijab. Matter of fact, we were talking about something. When Robert was saying, and they would spit in their mouths and stuff like that. They would spit in the mouths of the dhimmis and so on. The first thought in my head is that sounds like some crap that Muhammad Hijab is watching with all his golden showers stuff that he talks about. It's weird stuff. Anyway, don't know what he's into. Don't want to know. Pair character, up the super sticker again. Let's see. The third orange says, many of the black Muslims I talk to in my area say they are Muslim and therefore vegetarian. Is this an American offshoot thing like the Nation of Islam or 5%ers? I'm not familiar with that. You'd have to ask them what group they're from, because I'm not familiar with that. Let's see. Super chat. No comment, but thank you, Rodrigo. Goat Hub says, Robert without a suit is the sign of the end times. Yeah, you saw his hands injured. That's why it's not in his suit. But yeah, I told him he should just get a full body tattoo of a suit, and that way, even if something's going on, then he could just be sitting there in his suit no matter what. Let's see, a couple more. The comments are probs like Alhamdulillah. Pamela says, late join, God bless you three. Thank you for your time, creativity, logic, humor, and much love in Christ to you, D. Wood, and AP, and IP, and Robert Spencer. Thank you, Pamela. Science owes to Christianity like I owe to buffets. Oh, it's Fat IP, that's why.
Yeah, there he is. Who are these people?
Fat IP. We descended him in the night of Qadi. Yep. If God doesn't exist, then who is Jesus' dad?
You see?
You see?
You see?
If Jesus didn't exist, then who is Jesus' dad? Been watching y'all for a while. I love the channel D Wood. My dad is a huge wingling. Oh, you poor, poor boy. My dad is a huge wingling, and I don't know what to do about it. Any suggestions? Wow. Because you don't want to just abandon someone. You got to try and reason with him. So following the method of Greg Kokel in tactics, I would start with asking your dad various questions, like how could you possibly like the worst person in the world so much? I just start with questions like that. Let him answer. As he's saying it, just ask further questions. So maybe your dad like, oh, but he knows so much about Star Trek. And be like, but why would some nerd knowing so much about Star Trek, why would that make you want to idolize him and so on, be a great fan of his? And why would you not conclude that he's a total nerd? Just ask questions like that. Sorry.
I cannot die until I get you and Mike Winger on a stage together for a great conversation somewhere. It needs to happen.
I will just say he'd better bring an army. He'd better bring an army with him. Hill here. When I was in high school, our focus was on Western colonialism. White privilege, it was mostly a giant woke mess. Glad I'm listening to real history here. IP, I'm so inspired by your level of knowledge. Hey, it's inspiring philosophy, and Minahill is inspired by your level of knowledge.
Well, good. Appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, so I put a lot of books in my videos. So you go through some of my long videos. I just recommend people read those books, read with a highlighter so you remember better when you need to go back and look for things. Yeah, but I know the giant woke mess you're talking about. It bothers me too. I still am finding things. I was like, wow, they taught me this and I believed it my whole life. And it's just utter nonsense. Like, you just keep finding it. It's just, yeah, the whole conflict thesis, the idea of Christianity is harmful. All of this is just part of the woke mess.
Yeah. Along those lines, we never actually, I mean, you gave the idea of the conflict thesis, but, you pointed out that actual scholars, that's the conflict thesis or the warfare thesis. That is the view that was like most popular among lots of atheists for a while, especially the new atheists. That's the model between science and religion. Mm-hmm. They're in a state of perpetual conflict. So that's like, it's something along the lines of like Jesus mythicism, in the sense that you have something that will take off among groups at a popular level where they're not interacting with scholars. And then you have the scholarly level where no one holds that view, And it's like, wait, how are you guys on the internet, the champions of reason, when your views in a particular area are completely at odds with the scholarly community who specialize in that area? So it's like that, where you find lots of atheists who are Jesus mythers. You go up to the scholarly level, and what did Ehrman say? No one that I interact with at the scholarly level thinks that Jesus is just a myth or something like that. But it's similar with the conflict thesis, that very popular at the popular level among atheists would be laughed out of the classroom at the scholarly level. At the scholarly level, it's called the complexity thesis. Namely, it's complicated. The relationship is complicated. There are times when religion, or a particular religion, can help science. There are other times when it might be an obstacle. There are times when the church is funding scientific research. There are times when the church will say, hey, you need to shut up with this stuff. So that the idea is, it's complicated. You can't just say, here's the relationship, because it changes. And you'd have to say, if you're looking at the big picture, you'd have to say Christianity was really, really good for science. It was really, really good for science.
And also, there's, again, I recommend the book Of Popes and Unicorns by David Hutchins and David Unguriano. The last chapter, they note that the war between science and religion is kind of manufactured today. So for like over the 100 years, like intellectuals and atheistic scientists have been saying, your religion is opposed to science. Your religion is opposed to science. And preachers have been sort of like, Christian thinkers have sort of like responded, going like, okay, fine, we're at war then. And so this has been kind of like some sort of manufactured like hate that's sort of going on. It's not historical, but it is kind of happening now, because so many intellectual thinkers have said, this Christian religion is going against science, even though it isn't. And so we're going to manufacture this war kind of thing. So after Christians are being told this for like decades, they're like, okay, fine, we're against your science if your science is against our religion. So they've kind of created their own monster. Christianity wasn't opposed to science, but years of telling us that it is, they have turned Christians against science. So, and then this is in the last chapter of Popes and Unicorns. I highly recommend it. So, I mean, you can kind of create your own monster from this. And that's unfortunately what's kind of happening with a lot of the fundamentalists now.
Yeah. And I remember watching a lecture on the history of science by a guy from Johns Hopkins, and he was pointing out, he said, lots of times, rumor spreads, or some dumb idea spreads, or some myth spreads, and we don't know where it came from. He goes, the conflict we know exactly where it comes from. We know this is a situation where we know exactly where it comes from. And it's White and Draper in the 1800s, and these guys just, you know, centuries of the explosion of science in the Christian world. And these guys come along, actually I forget which one it was. I forget. Was it White? One of them was anti-Catholic specifically, and it's because
they both kind of were. But the thing is, they weren't even atheists. They were actually like more like progressive Christians, and how they were thinking. You know, they thought they were going to kind of like fix religion, and they end up creating this whole monstrosity they never even wanted.
Yeah, one of them had a problem with Catholic immigrants coming to the U.S., so he tried to like, Catholicism just destroys everything and destroys science. Look what they did to Galileo. And then so he quote mines everything down through history. By the way, guys, these are the same people who spread the idea that in the past Christians thought that the earth is flat, and that everyone's worried that when Columbus goes out that he's going to fall off the edge of the earth. Complete total nonsense. I think historians of science were able to find something like two knowledgeable people ever who held the flat earth theory in the Christian world and so on. And so it's a myth.
Cosmas and I forget, it starts with an L. He was a tutor for Constantine's sons. It's like Lactatius or something like that. Lactantius, I believe. So Cosmas and Lactantius.
Yeah, and so it's a myth, and it's just amazing that those myths can become the dominant view to where people today still, there's always this conflict between Christianity and religion. Why? How do you know that? Because of Galileo. Look what. Do you know anything about Galileo? Do you know anything about that whole issue? No, I don't, but I heard that. It's exactly what I heard. It's what I heard in like 10th grade biology class and so on. GoatHub says Muslim spits in the mouth of Dimmy on Daniel's laptop. Yes, that is something that would be on Daniel's Predator laptop. Celeria says, got here rather late as a result of recording a video. Glad to arrive in time to say hi and contribute some pocket change regardless. Thank you, Celeria. Two more here. Sink or swim with stars. Just saw Mike Winger's bookshelves. Lol, I know. What a joke. What a bookshelf joke. Guy should be ashamed of himself. And finally, we have Gay P. Has anyone seen Buff IP anywhere? He's such a hunk. This is weird, man.
Right here. I'm right here. What are you talking about?
Yeah, what are you asking? He's been on the show the entire time.
What's going on?
All right, guys. So, yeah, this is every show pretty much boils down to this. There's a bunch of people relying on deception and manipulation, trying to take advantage of people's ignorance. The solution is to do away with the ignorance. So everyone needs to learn what you can. We know that people have different, people are in all sorts of different situations in life as far as what they do and what they have time for and so on. Everyone's got to learn the basics. It's the only way. I don't know what world anyone else is looking at, but you have a ton of people trying to deceive and manipulate others right now. And if we do not learn how to respond to that and how to create a population of informed people, you're gonna get what you deserve if you don't. You're gonna get if the vast majority of the population says, no, we choose to remain ignorant and we refuse to learn the basics. Okay, well, then you're going to get what you deserve. You're asking for it. You're basically asking to be deceived and manipulated. So anyway, we'll help as much as we can, but it does come down to other people doing their part. All right, final thoughts on everything IP. You've mentioned some stuff you got coming up, but any closing thoughts here?
Yeah, I recommend the channel History for Atheists by Tim O'Neill. He's an atheist, and he corrects a lot of the misconceptions about medieval history. He's got a 3-part interview with an historian, Tony Christie, on Galileo. He's got a lot of other good interviews covering like misconceptions about Christian history, so you can check that out.
Check that stuff out, and be sure to follow Inspiring Philosophy on YouTube and TikTok and Twitter, whatever platforms you're on. Be sure you're following them on those, because putting out a lot of good content. And all right, I think that's about it. We will catch you all next time. And as far as Robert, because Robert was on here with us, if you're interested in the history of jihad, then his book, The History of Jihad, just the best book out there. He's got the Quran with commentary, so he's got the Quran, the critical Quran. If you want to stay up to date on jihad, like daily news, follow his website, Jihad Watch. That just everything that happens, it gets posted there. If you if you prefer video format, whenever we're free, we tend to go live on Wednesday evenings at 8 for This Week in Jihad, where we cover everything that's happened that week or the most important events of that week. So figure out what you're interested in and check that stuff out. And we have here Pamela C. with Amen, John 10:10. Indeed. All right. We'll catch you all next time.